Welcome to Secular ACA. I'm Bill. In past videos, I sketched out the principles of secular ACA and shared how they applied in my own successful recovery. In this video, I'll talk more about those principles, but this time from a different perspective. That is, I'll discuss those principles in relation to the secular ACA formula for a successful recovery. That formula is W+R1 equals R2. The W stands for the wounded inner child. The R1 stands for reparenting. The R2 stands for recovery. But the equal sign doesn't mean that recovery automatically follows from reparenting your wounded inner child. Recovery only happens if you work the program well. That's why the ACA literature says it works if you work it. I'll talk more about the meaning of the equal sign in a moment. W+R1 is the secular ACA program. Reparenting your wounded inner child is the work of secular ACA. It's also the work of traditional ACA, but without the religion or mystical vocabulary that runs throughout traditional ACA. That stuff isn't necessary for a full recovery. Working the secular ACA program requires what I call self-reflective consciousness. That is the recovery state of mind. It's the desire to become more aware of yourself so that you can recover from the ill effects of dysfunctional parenting. Self-reflective consciousness is the deliberate effort to try to understand your own wounded inner child and how that child needs reparenting. In my experience, my wounded inner child started its formation as a 5-year-old kid who had just realized that he was being treated unfairly by his mom and dad. From that point on, my pain and anger began to accumulate. It was as if I had a pain bank account in me to which my parents made regular deposits. The pain didn't go away, it just built up. Of course, I wasn't aware of this process at the time. While I felt each instance of the pain my parents inflicted on me, I had no idea that it was building up in me. I also didn't realize that I had a parallel anger bank account that was also growing along with my pain account. My store of pain and anger was below the level of my conscious mind, but it drove me to act out in violent and destructive ways as a juvenile and as a teen. My wounded inner child also contained my damaged self-esteem, my self-doubt, and my tendency to self-sabotage. So that was my wounded inner child. However, everyone is unique. So everyone's wounded inner child will be unique too. Each person has to get in touch with their own wounded inner child. My wounded inner child was the location or storage center of all the ill effects and unhappy feelings caused to me by my parents' cruelty. In traditional ACA, there's a lot of talk about your inner teenager. Sometimes distinctions are made like 13, 15, 17, or whatever. Whether people can really feel those distinctions or not, I think such talk is a distraction from ACA recovery rather than a help to it. In my view, the wounded inner child probably reaches completion sometime between after a person was born and well before they reach puberty. the making of a wounded inner child probably goes on between 1 and 10 years old. Puberty is an important part of human development, but I think it's not relevant in ACA. I don't know of any empirical studies about the boundaries of a wounded inner child, so I'm making my best guess. Next in the formula is the concept of reparenting, R1. Traditional ACA says that recovery will follow when you learn to become your own loving parent. Supposedly, part of learning to reparent involves calling upon the G word or some higher power for intervention and guidance. But I learned to become my own caring parent without looking outside myself to some mystical force. Ultimately, my recovery came from relying on my own natural healing power rather than any higher power. I did, however, learn a lot from sharing in meetings about my struggle and from listening to others share about theirs. I probably wouldn't have made much, if any, progress without my ACA groups. Reparenting for me has been a process of learning to feel the pain and anger and other unhappy feelings that have been held inside by my wounded inner child, and then trying to explain to my inner child why I feel this way and why I don't have to feel this way now. For example, the fear of my next punishment caused me lots of anxiety and sometimes panic attacks. When I felt these, I would gently explain to my wounded inner child that I'm bigger now and that mom and dad can no longer hurt me. It seems that once my inner child came to believe that it was safe and didn't have to be afraid anymore, it would relax and stop producing fear and anxiety. In other words, once I understood the reasons for my bad feelings, those feelings went away. I didn't suppress them. In fact, by feeling them, I brought them out of their former suppressed or unconscious condition. Understanding my hurtful and unhappy feelings generally resulted in resolving them. This is how my natural healing power worked. When coming to ACA, each person has his or her own wounded inner child. So each person has to learn to become his or her own loving parent. But because every person is a unique individual, he or she must construct their own new parent. There's no one-size-fits-all loving parent. Nobody can tell you what characteristics your new parent must have or how your constructed parent should act when reparenting. Traditional ACA literature says your loving parent should be kind, gentle, and humorous. But this is only a suggestion. Only you can figure out what characteristics your new parent should have. This might require some trial and error before you realize what you need. Doing what is necessary for your recovery usually isn't easy. Many people give up in frustration. I struggled for quite a while before I was able to construct my own caring parent. I found that participating in ACA groups, such as study groups and meetings, was very helpful. First, I was constantly reminded that I wasn't alone. I was with other folks who also suffered childhood trauma. Secondly, when I shared, I felt listened to and therefore worth listening to. I felt valued by someone, and this helped in repairing my broken self-esteem. A third benefit to doing group work was that when I listened to other members share about themselves, I learned new ways of approaching my own reparenting challenges. There are no rules about copying helpful techniques from other people in ACA. So, going back to the formula, this is the process of W+R1. To work this program well, you have to sustain for a long time what I've called your self-reflective consciousness. This process requires a continued effort to turn your attention upon your inner self so as to increase your self-awareness. This is what is needed to get in touch with your wounded inner child so you can learn to understand its wounds. Then you must keep your attention on your inner self. As you make the effort to construct a loving parent suitable to the recovery needs of your inner child, this involves a process of dialoguing with yourself. You ask yourself, what are you feeling? You ask yourself, why are you feeling that way? You ask yourself, what can I do to stop feeling the painful and unwanted feelings? You might call this recovery mindfulness. These efforts are hard to start and hard to sustain. Unfortunately, it is easy to get distracted. Like I said, many people quit out of confusion and frustration. So, learning to look at yourself so as to become more self-aware is one of the hardest parts of working the ACA program. This is a skill that is never taught in our society. It's not taught in school, nor in any aspect of socialization. Everyone learns to look outside themselves, but not inside. In school, students look at the teacher, the blackboard, and the books. They learn to memorize lessons, but not to feel their feelings. Careers are outside yourself. Money is outside yourself. At church, people learn to look outside themselves and up to the heavens for salvation. For marriage and family life, you have to look outside yourself. No wonder it's so difficult to understand and to practice self-reflective consciousness. ACA requires every person to be a pioneer and enter into an inner territory that has never before been explored. Very few people come to ACA with any preparation for increasing their self-awareness. Maybe this is something that ought to be part of our public school curriculum. Be that as it may, it's easy to see why the equal sign in our formula should be read as can equal and not as definitely will equal. Recovery is not guaranteed, and it doesn't come automatically. It has to be achieved by working the program well. As I've suggested, there are three main requirements for working the program well. One is to get in touch with your wounded inner child. Second is to construct your own loving parent. And third is to stay in the recovery state of mind. But this isn't a linear process like the steps to baking a cake. The three things have to be done simultaneously and in relation to each other. As you get in touch with your wounded inner child, you begin to see what is needed for reparenting, and you try to keep your mind on task. If you do these things well, recovery is sure to follow. Finally, what is R2, or recovery? Lots of things happen in recovery. Healing is multifaceted, but in general, there are two main categories in recovery. One is that the ill effects of having a wounded inner child fall away. For me, the pain and anger just vaporized as I began to understand why they were there. The bad behavior that my wounded inner child drove me to engage in stopped long ago. Secondly, as they say in traditional ACA, you will start to feel a wholeness you never knew was possible. For me, the feeling of wholeness was the answer to all my existential questions about life. This is what I really wanted. In my 6th video, which I've already posted, I talk more about the nice feelings that my recovery has given me, and which I hope to develop even more. In conclusion, if you read some of the traditional ACA literature, and it starts to get kind of obscure or murky, just think of the secular ACA formula to restore clarity to your understanding. The formula shows precisely what is really important in the ACA program of recovery. Feel free to leave comments, questions, objections, or whatever you want to say in the comment section. Send me an email if you want to comment privately. In future videos, I'll address the concerns raised in the comments, and I'll have more to say about the implications of secular ACA. Please sock it to the like button and also subscribe. When the algorithm sees your approval, it will show secular ACA to more YouTube users. For now, I'll close with the secular ACA Serenity affirmation. Today I seek the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know that one is me. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, and you're worth it.